Plains Indian Wars by John Poniske. How to play snippet number 1, the Transcontinental Railroad. So in the east, coming out of St. Louis, they're building the Union Pacific Railroad. And then over to the west, coming out of Sacramento, they're building the Central Pacific Railroad. And on the game board, it's represented by this central line. These are your vacant spaces that you want to fill with these black cubes, which represent the railroads. Now, in order to build a railroad, you need the brown settler cubes. So let's do a scenario. For each brown settler cube in an adjacent region to the railhead, and starting off at St. Louis, you could build upon a black disc draw. You can build 1 railroad, up to 3 railroads. So in this scenario here, there are 3 brown settlers adjacent to 3 vacant spaces. Upon a black disc draw, you can build 3 railroad pieces. Let's say this is the situation. You can still only build 3 black railroads. In the future turn now, and this was the situation, you actually have 4 brown cubes next to the next 3 places. You could build 3 more, maximum of 3. About in the next black disc draw, the next turn that you draw the disc, in this very situation. Well, these 2 are no longer adjacent to the empty spaces, so they wouldn't count. But these 2 can count, and there's 2 of them, so you would be able to build 2 more as such. Also, every time you draw the black disc, you roll the settler's dice, and anytime a symbol comes up, and this is perfect, so there's 2 symbols on the settler's dice. There's the hit symbol, and there's the treaty symbols. So for every symbol you roll, in this case, both hit symbols, you can build a railroad in the Elm Mountain spaces. So in that scenario, we can build 2. And once you build all 5, then based on the number of settlers you have in adjacent spaces, you can start building the Central Pacific Railroad out of here. So in this scenario here, after the mountain spaces are built, you can then build, let's see, this is 3. This could be adjacent here. These 2 could be adjacent here. Any way you can try to arrange that, that would be a maximum of 3 again. Okay, let's talk about movement. So you can use rail movement. And let's have a scenario coming out of St. Louis where there's 2 cavalry cubes and a couple of settler cubes, and using influence movement. Let's say it was a cavalry disc, and on a cavalry card they had a movement. They're going to move this group, and they can use influence movement. The cavalries can use the railroad as 1 movement. Think of the railroad as a regent, and then a second movement can come out from adjacent to the railhead into adjacent region. So this would be 2. 3 movement, if you had that movement on your card, would be 1 on the railhead, 2 in adjacent region to the railhead, and 3 to the next region. Let's say you had, and I think there are 2 cards that have 1 movement on them. Let's say you just had 1. You couldn't use the rail movement because in that situation, you're just on the railroad and you can't reach the region, so that wouldn't count. That's a clarification the designer has made. All right, what else? We have some cards here. There are 2 cards that coincide with the railroad. So this one is the Central Pacific Railroad, and it says place 2 brown cubes in the Sacramento box and 2 black cubes in the mountain railroad spaces if one or more M spaces is unfilled. So let's clear off the board here, and you're playing this card. Well, you get 2 free railroad cubes, and these are difficult to build, so that's a welcome card to get out early. All right, and then of course you can place 2 brown cubes in the Sacramento box, which would be here. That's the Settlers card called the Central Pacific Railroad card. Looks like number 1. And this card, card number 3, is the Union Pacific Railroad. And it says, no engagements against regions adjacent to either railhead for the remainder of the current disc draw. So current disc draw, let's say this is the situation. That means if it was, well, the settler is using the card. So let's bring out the settler cube, and he plays the Union Pacific card. All right, that means on the settler's turn and any future turn for the remainder of the disc draw. So purple, northern plains, southern plains, and even wagons. There can be no engagements in regions adjacent to the railhead. So here's the railhead, so it could be no fighting here and no fighting here for that remainder of the disc draw. And on this side situation, well, it's not built, but so let's build it. Let's complete the railroad. And try to line these up a little bit better. Okay, so this would represent the railhead, so there could be no engagements in this region and no engagements in this region, which are adjacent to this railhead, if the Union Pacific Railroad. Now this card, you don't discard it. You keep it out on the board, keep it on the side of the board until all of the discs are played out, or drawn and played out. That's called an enduring event. And what else? Completion of the railroad is going to trigger the end of the game. Now, you continue with the disc draw. So if this is a scenario, and the railroad was completed here, you would finish all of these turns, and then the game would end, and then you would add up victory points. What about victory points? Well, if the U.S. player happens to complete the railroad, that's 3 victory points for them. If the Plains Indians prevent the U.S. player from completing it, the railroad's incomplete, that's 3 victory points for the Indian player. If any questions or something I missed, let me know in the comments.